Hello again, fellow audiophiles. I am Wave Theory, and this is the HiFiMan Isvarna. This is a $2,900 US closed back hybrid driver headphone, and we're going to talk about what hybrid driver means in more detail later on in the review, but the short of it is that it has both a planar magnetic driver and what HiFiMan refers to as a subwoofer in the form of a dynamic driver here in each cup. Alright, so we will dive into that as the review unfolds and talk about what that means and of course what the impacts are on sound. This was sent to me directly from HiFiMan. They have asked nothing in return other than a fair and honest evaluation. If I am an affiliate link partner with any retailers who carry this headphone, I will put affiliate links in the description down below for those retailers. So if you like what I have to say about this product and you want to buy it and you want to help support the channel, please consider using one of those affiliate links. I will get a small kickback and I only use affiliate link money to keep the channel running. This is easily my favorite HiFiMan closed back headphone to date. And before you get too excited, recognize that that is a pretty low bar, as HiFiMan's track record with closed back headphones has been less than stellar. Alright, so, but this one I actually like quite a bit. I think it is a big step forward for HiFiMan in terms of their closed back designs. But at the same time, it is not perfect yet. So we are going to unpack all of that right on the other side of shameless self-promotion. Let's get into it.
Hello. I'm one of the reasons that Wave Theory can't spend all of his money on audio gear. He wants you to know that your support is vital for keeping the channel running. So if you enjoy Wave Theory's bussin' review riz and no-cap review style and want to encourage him to stay in the basement so I don't have to listen to his dad jokes as much, like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can also send him a donation on PayPal or sign up for the Patreon. Links are in the description. Now on to the review.
The Isvarna is a very unique and interesting headphone on the market. Not only is it a high-end closed back, and while there certainly are more of those in the market these days, the really high-end headphone market is definitely dominated by open backs. So that it is a $2,900 unit that is closed back is just interesting in and of itself. It is additionally interesting though because of that hybrid driver design. So each cup in here has two drivers in it. There is a large planar magnetic driver, and planar magnetics are HiFiMan's specialty, right? That is where their strength is. That is their bread and butter driver type. So you get a large-ish planar magnetic driver with HiFiMan's, neo or nanometer thickness diaphragm and stealth magnet tech in the magnet assembly and all of that. You get one of those in each cup here that handles the mid-range through the treble frequencies. And then in each cup here, they have an oval-shaped, and they use the word subwoofer on their website, but it is an oval-shaped dynamic driver that handles the bass and the sub-bass. Now, multi-driver headphones are very much a challenge. Okay? The idea here is let's just talk about speakers for a minute. Speakers in a room. Speakers very often have multiple drivers in them. They've got a woofer and a tweeter. If they're a two-way design, they've got a woofer, a mid-range, a tweeter. If they're a three-way design in there, and if they have multiple drivers in them, they usually, if they are a speaker of any kind of good quality, have crossovers in them that filter out undesired frequencies from each of the drivers. In other words, the woofer only gets bass frequencies. The mid-range driver only gets mid-range frequencies. The tweeter only gets higher frequencies and treble, all right, if it is a three-way design in there as well. Okay, so that's speakers, and speakers can get away with having multiple drivers on them because when you sit back a couple of meters or several feet from a two- or three-way speaker, the distance between the driver and your ears, or the drivers and your ears, more or less equalizes so you don't get phasing errors. Because if you have two drivers that are equidistant from your ear, okay, and they're putting out the same sound, no problem. Okay, but if you have two drivers that are not equidistant from your ear, they are at different distances from your ear, and you ask them to reproduce the same sound, you are going to get some phasing errors in there because there will be some peaks from this sound wave that meet some troughs of this sound wave and so forth, which changes the shape of the wave that actually reaches your ear. Okay, in headphones, there usually is just not the space to be playing a whole lot of games with multiple drivers, because that close to your ear, even tiny little differences in distances can create some of those phasing errors in there, and that really plagues multi-driver headphones. IEMs generally can get away with it because the drivers in IEMs are much smaller yet than even the IEM shell. And so much like a speaker, you can get those very small drivers far enough away from the ear that they start to behave like the multiple drivers on a speaker baffle. Okay, but for headphones, again, very much a challenge. So what HiFiMan has done here is they have played with the positioning and all of that in here, where they claim that they have licked that phasing problem, that it is not an issue here. And so I'm going to comment on that as the review unfolds as well. Okay, the other thing that they did is they actually put a crossover in here too. So there is a little electrical circuit in each headphone cup that filters out some sounds, and it sends the low frequencies to that dynamic subwoofer driver, and it sends the mid and upper frequencies to the planar magnetic driver. And they fit all of that into a cup of this size. All right, so this is a very interesting design here, and I was very curious to get this in, put it through its paces, and see how it sounds and all of that. Okay, I'm going to show you a close-up of the build here from an overhead view and a little bit more detail here in just a moment. But let's quick go over specs here. So again, $2,900 US. The rated impedance here is 16 ohms with a 93 decibel sensitivity. I don't know if that's 93 decibels per milliwatt or 93 decibels per millivolt. I have a feeling it's milliwatt though, because I did not find these to be overly difficult to drive. My iBasso DX260 DAP and my Cord Hugo 2, which is also like a transportable headphone amp, DAC and headphone amp in there, both pushed this fairly well, not just to loud volume levels, but with a fair amount of control and detail and holography in there as well. But it was like both of those, or the DX260 was on its highest gain setting and had to be pushed to like a level 65 to 70 out of 100 to get up to my reference listening level of about a 72 to 75 decibel average. The Hugo 2 doesn't really have a gain control on it. If you're familiar with the way the Hugo 2 works, and I'm pointing it to it like you know where it is in my room, sorry, but it's behind the camera there. It's on its charger. Okay, but that has a multicolor wheel in it that when you turn it, it goes through the colors of the rainbow, and the closer you get to white, like you go through the blues and like then the violets and all that, and then the closer to white is where it's putting out more power and getting louder. And I was consistently like in the light blue range to get this up to my same 72 to 75 dB AV reference level on this too. So it's not the easiest headphone in the world to drive, but it's also far from the most difficult headphone to drive in terms of its power demand in there. So despite being multiple drivers and having a subwoofer in it, okay, it's still middling difficulty to drive, let's call it that. All right. With that said, let's go ahead and cut to that clip where we do a close-up of the build. We'll come back on the other side. I'll make some comments about the packaging and how the fit in the build and all of that, and then we'll get into sound. All right, let's do it. All right, we'll do quasi-overhead view to talk about some of the interesting design features of the Isvarna here, because it does have some interesting design features. So first of all, the cup shape. It just like it gets bigger here in the back. We see that it is much thicker in the back than it is in the front here. Okay, we have this nice like machined metal here look to it there. And then we have right here what looks like a vent. HiFiMan on their website calls this a dust cap, and there's one on either side. And it turns out that their subwoofer driver, the little oval-shaped dynamic driver in there that handles the bass, in there is right behind this dust cap. So these things do leak some sound a little bit, and when they leak sound, most of it does come through these dust caps here. So it is also a little bit of venting and pressure relief there. So while it is a closed back, that also means it is not the most isolating closed back that is out there on the market. So you will get a little bit of sound leakage on here, although they are not too bad about external noise attenuation when you are have them on your head in terms of hearing what's going on around you. All right. Classic HiFiMan headband here. That's not new or anything like that. Here, we see that we have round ear pads that are in fact also thicker in the back than they are in the front. So we have some forward angle to them on there. And the other thing about this is that these pads just Velcro right on. So if you get them in the right spot, you can fairly easily just peel them right off, stick them right back on, okay? I mean, both sides, obviously. Let's have a look at what's going on in here. So what we see here is like we've got some damping material, and then you see like the magnet structure there of the planar magnetic driver, and then you see part of the oval-shaped bass driver right here, which looks like it's almost angled upward. Okay, comes in here at the back, all that, and then the pad has a corresponding notch here in the back to help you get that lined up when you go to put it back on the headphone and all of that there. So that's a pretty slick little way of doing that there. All right. Standard dual 3.5 millimeter cabling input here. That's flush mounted. That's HiFiMan's signature. Their stock cables always suck, so you're going to want to buy a good aftermarket stock cable for these because, I mean, they're nearly a $3,000 headphone. So, I mean, most people who buy $3,000 headphones are buying cables for them anyway, and this one is no exception. But interesting looking design on this. It does look a little goofy on the head. Elsewhere in the review, I'll show you what it looks like on my head. But I just thought it was worth doing this overhead view to see some of the design stuff that was going on there. All right, back to me on camera. All right, as promised, here's what they look like on my head. From straight on, they look kind of okay, at least like when I have seen myself wear them on a Zoom call or something like that. They look fine, but when I turn my head a little bit and you start to see the thickness of the cup come into play, that's when they start to look a little bit goofy to me. Okay, but of course that's in the eye of the beholder, but yeah, that's what they look like on the head. As far as the sound attenuation goes, they're not great. These are not the most isolating closebacks on the market by any stretch. Like when I snap my fingers around like this, I hear them reasonably clearly. Not like I would with an open back headphone, of course, but I still hear a lot of those finger snaps, you know, quite a bit. And like my furnace actually is running in the adjacent room to my listening room right here, and I just heard it kick on through the wall and then through this headphone, all of that. And it's not loud, but it is there. Okay. The packaging that this comes in, it gets the premium experience from HiFiMan. You get this like box here that's got this faux leather cover on it, and it says Isvarna on it and all of that, like you get with their high-end headphones. So if that's something that you like, then there it is. I'm not going to show you the stock cables. They're crap. We've already talked about that. HiFiMan stock cables, at least they're nylon covered these days, and they're not those weird rubber coated catheter cables that they had in the old days, but they, you know, aren't great. All right, so I think you are going to want to buy aftermarket cables for them. Okay. As far as comfort then goes, like the clamp force is good. They are, just because of their nature, they feel a little bit heavy-ish. But they're not super heavy. I didn't have any neck discomfort or anything like that when I wear them. The HiFiMan headband system continues to spread the weight around the head well, so there's no problems with hot spotting or anything like that. The clamp is a little bit on the tighter side, but not real bad. Like, I don't get any hot spots or anything or pressure points on the side of my head from it. And it does a reasonably good job of keeping the headphone in place as you move your head around and so forth there. So that's all well and good. The ear pad opening, like I showed you earlier, like it might be just a little bit small for some larger ears. So if you are a person with larger earlobes, you might need to be prepared for a little bit of pressure on your earlobes as you wear these. But I personally didn't have any discomfort issues here with this headphone, even after some longer listening sessions. All right, let's start turning our attention towards sound then here. Test gear, as usual, I'm a digital music listener, so I would have sourced music using lossless or high-res FLAC files or DSD files, either played locally or, in the case of FLAC files, streamed from Qobuz all through Roon. Roon endpoints would have included the Chord 2Go streamer, Sonor Ultra Rendu streamers, or the FIO SR11 streamers, again, all used as Roon endpoints. Several different DACs or DAC amps here. I've already mentioned the mobile/transportable units of the iBasso DX260. That one would have played local files only, either again, the FLAC or DSD files off of a micro SD card using the built-in Mango app from iBasso there. All right, but the iBasso DX260 DAP, the Chord Hugo 2, which would have been mated to one of its 2Go streamers. Okay, in there, I have in for review the FIO K17 desktop DAC amp. That got a fair amount of time pushing this. I tried the Gishelli J2S DAC, which is the 4499 variant. I'm using Burson V7 Vivid op amps in that, and I have a Swagman 12-volt linear power supply powering that unit. That beefed up J2S would have been feeding an Aoun S17 Pro Class A headphone amp in there, and then the gear quality keeps going up from there. I tried different combinations here. I tried the live Harmony stack of the Harmony DAC with the matching HP2A amplifier. That also would have been fed by their, what's it called, micro DDC, DDC and reclocker in there, and then I2S from that into the Harmony DAC. Okay, then also the Denafrips Pontus 15th anniversary edition DAC. I have that in for review. That would have fed either the HiFiMan Golden Wave Prelude amplifier or my LTA Z10E amplifier. I also tried the Lampezator Baltic 3 DAC into that LTA Z10E, and I tried the Berkeley Alpha Series 2 DAC into the Z10E and also into the Prelude. The Berkeley Alpha Series 2 DAC also has a Singer SU6 DDC between it and a Sonor Ultra Rendu streamer. Okay, that's a lot of source gear, because I tried, again, multiple different combinations on there, and I'm going to talk about why here in a little bit. But let's get to the sound of this unit here. What does it sound like? And in a word, fun, right? Like the technicalities of this, the tuning of it is solid, but not reference level. But it is a very engaging and very fun headphone to listen to, particularly if you are a bass head. Okay, I think bass heads are gonna like this one because the use of the term subwoofer to describe that dynamic driver in here to handle the bass is probably not all that out of place. Okay, getting into it a bit more. The perceived frequency response on this from a 1,000-foot view comes across as a little bit W-shaped to me. There definitely is a bass shelf. Okay, somewhere in around like the 250, 300-ish hertz range or so, HiFiMan has a frequency response curve posted in there. But anyway, around there, you get a fairly sizable bass shelf. Matches one of the later Harman targets, or is pretty close to one of the more recent Harman targets that has a bass shelf in it there. So lots of bass presence here, very forward bass, very active, hard-hitting, accurate, textured, detailed bass to go with it, but lots of bass, okay? Have I mentioned lots of bass? There's lots of bass. All right. Then I say W because there seems to be a little bit of a bump somewhere in the middle of the mid-range range. And then there is kind of a more classic HiFiMan treble presentation here where it's going to be a little bit hot and sharp for some. There is also some signal chain synergy sensitivity that we need to talk about here, which helps with those mid-range and treble peaks and tonality. We'll get into that a little bit more, but even when it is behaving well, it's still not quite as tonally even or smooth through both the mids and the treble as many open backs in the price range and some other closed backs that we'll talk about when we get to comparisons here. So the accuracy of the tuning and the tonality here is not quite reference level, but it also isn't horribly bad either, okay? We are light years beyond the Audivina, okay? Light years beyond that. We are much stronger than the old, what is it, the R10D. Okay, they're like $1,300 dynamic driver closed back, all that. We're way beyond that one too here in terms of tonal accuracy and so forth. Okay, now the timbre though, even with those peaks, is like, again, not reference level, but it is not bad. I am, as I've said many times, mid-range sensitive. I perceive shoutiness, honkiness, hollowness in the timbre, nasally kinds of sounds and all of that very quickly, and they bother me a lot when I hear them. This headphone doesn't always do that, but it is prone to those traits, particularly with some signal chains, which again we will get into here and there. Not all the time, but it happens enough that there were some times when I'm like, yeah, okay, there's a little bit of tonal inaccuracy in there that I'm not a huge fan of. Okay, but by the same token, it was never, I can't say never, on many signal chains, it was not so far over the line there that I found it unlistenable. There were some rare occasions where it did get to be too fatiguing, especially through the mids for me to continue forward and all of that. Let's talk about that HiFiMan treble presentation a little bit here. There is some sibilance issues here and there, some sharp S's and T's. Sometimes some cymbal hits can sound a little bit thin and tizzy and brittle to their presentation. And again, that changes a fair amount with signal chain synergies, but it's always there a little bit. If you're a treble sensitive listener, if you have had trouble with HiFiMan's treble presentation in the past, this is not going to fix that issue for you out of the box. You'll either need EQ or just find a different headphone. Okay, so let's just get those things out of the way there first. I found the mid-range issues to be a bigger problem and more fatiguing for me than the treble issues, but I've long been a HiFiMan fan. Their treble issues have typically not bothered me all that much, and they have gotten better over the recent years, particularly with their open backs. This one is like kind of a little bit back a generation or two in terms of the treble presentation and quality there. Okay. Outside of that though, like all the other technicals are quite strong. Attack and decay timing is fairly accurate there. Big soundstage. One of the biggest sound stages I've heard from any closed back headphone. And it's a larger soundstage than many open back headphones can do. HiFiMan has always been a soundstage monster of a company. They have normally put out models, particularly their egg-shaped planar magnetics that just throw huge sound stages. This is right up there with them. I was really quite surprised by how big and open sounding it is for being a closed back headphone. The imaging, the separation, like those spatial and positional effects that go on in there are also pretty strong. They're not as good as like the best $3,000+ open backs are going to give you. But again, as far as closed backs go, like this is among the one of the more three-dimensional and holographic spatial presentations, and again, in addition to being big, okay, that I have heard from a closed back headphone really at any price, and it challenges a lot of open backs that would be, you know, around $2,000 or so in that trait as well. All right, but really one of the standout features of the presentation here is that bass, okay? Again, these are like bass head headphones that might qualify to some as bass cannons because that bass shelf is potent. Like, I mean, there's the presence is there. It does roll off a little bit where it kind of reaches the output level of most of HiFiMan's open backs when it gets all the way down to 20 hertz, but it doesn't really start that roll off until around 40, 50 hertz or anything. So a lot of the deep bass there is still very present. Okay, so bass for days on this, and it is very active, lively, quick, hard-hitting bass. A lot of speed to the bass, a lot of impact to the bass. There's lots of texturing, and there's a lot of pitch definition to it. I really like the bass on this headphone. Okay, it's fun, but it's accurate. But there is a lot of it. It does a good job of not bleeding into the mid bass. So like male vocals and that sort of thing, they don't sound overly bloated to me. Or muddy or anything like that. Like there's no muddiness to the sound. It's just that there is very excellent bass, but there is very much of that bass. All right, so that's going to be a thing that you as a potential buyer are going to have to keep in mind here. The bass is very technical, very well done. It's also very musical and very fun, but it is a lot. So if you are a bass sensitive listener, that might be an issue for you and is something to keep in mind. All right, but it is truly one of the stars of the presentation here. And my brain didn't know what to do with it for a while because it was like, wow, I hear this quantity of bass and I expect it to be bloated and muddy or sloppy or something, but it was always just so clean and textured and detailed. The only time I heard it struggle a little bit, and this is only in comparison to what it does elsewhere, is with the track Why So Serious by Hans Zimmer. In there, at the synthesized bass line that starts at around 3.5 minutes in there, there is a little bit of distortion in there, not any buzzes or rattles or anything like that. It's just the tones aren't as clear as I have heard them from like an open back HE1000 or a Susvara, right? But it's not far off of that either. Okay. Resolution, detail retrieval, also excellent. It seems very in line for the price, whether we're talking about open or closed in there. So, I mean, there's, again, a lot of texturing to the sound and all of that sort of thing in there. So, I mean, those are all of its traits there in a vacuum. Well, not in a vacuum, but on its own. Let me talk about signal chains, and then we'll get into comparisons with other closed back headphones and maybe a couple of open backs too. Okay. Most of the time, it matched pretty well. I really enjoyed the sound of this one off of the FiiO K17, which I've been reasonably impressed with that K17 so far. And that sounded really good driving the Isvarna here. The DX260, the Hugo 2, they weren't as clean or as clear as the desktop things are just because I don't think they had quite as much power. Well, they obviously don't have quite as much power, but they were pretty solid and listenable and would be good transportable or mobile things if you're going to take this big, hulky, funny look, you know, big, chunky, funky looking headphone on the go with you there. Like, you know, you could drive it with one of those. The stack of the Shelly J2S and the Aoun S17 Pro also sounded really good with this. The Live Harmony stack sounded really good with this. Where things got a little bit interesting was when I got into my really high-end sound gear. Both the Prelude amp and the Z10E amp can drive this beautifully and sound great doing it. What I noticed though is that this headphone got very reactive to whatever DAC was feeding those things. It was fine with the Alpha, my Berkeley Alpha Series 2 into either amp, the Z10E or the Prelude. Okay, that DAC feeding either of those amps, driving this headphone, great. Okay, probably among the best combination of gear that I could put together for this headphone. But very oddly, the Pontus 15th edition and the Baltic 3, two excellent DACs, okay, on their own, just had a sound profile, or have a sound profile that this headphone does not react to. This one, it gets much more uneven and sharper and more brittle in the treble. The Baltic 3 was mostly the mid-range issue, just the shoutiness, the honkiness, and all of that came forward. The Baltic 3 seems to have a little bit of mid-emphasis to it here and there. So on this headphone, which that mid-range peak, as we talked about, is kind of already walking right up to the line of sometimes it's a little on the shouty side and sometimes it's not. Okay, the Baltic just pushes it over the line much more often into shouty territory, which got very fatiguing for me, and I didn't enjoy it. Okay, all of the detail was there, the bass dynamics, the spatial presentation, everything else was that great. I just, the mid-range issue there was just overwhelming for me from that Baltic DAC there through either the Z10E or the Prelude. The Pontus 15th does a similar thing in the mids, maybe not quite as bad as the Baltic does in the mids, but the treble became very sharp, very sibilant, very fatiguing, okay, almost piercing, okay, from that DAC as well. And again, like, these are not indictments of the Pontus 15th or the Baltic 3. I know for sure the Baltic 3 is amazing. See my review for that. The Pontus 15th so far has proven itself to be pretty solid into my ears. I just have not finished that review yet. Still very much in the listening phase there. But I have no reason to suspect that it's a problematic unit generally. It's just this headphone didn't react well to it. So I take this to mean that you have to be careful with the whole signal chain. If you're going to be an Isvarna user, you've got to put some thought into that and just be careful in those, particularly with the mid-range and the treble. You probably want a signal chain that is a little bit more relaxed through those ranges in there to help smooth out some of that peakiness that's in there if you're not an EQ person out there either. So those are some things to keep in mind. All right. Comparisons. Two higher end closebacks that I own include the Focal Radiance, which was $1,300 and but was a limited edition, and I don't think you can get it anymore. Okay, but just to give you context for what it is and what its price is, and then the Dan Clark Audio E3, which is a $2,000 US headphone. Okay, planar magnetic closeback and okay, like one of the best priced performance headphones out there of the market of any type, in my opinion there. Now, I also have in for review right now the ZMF Caldera closed, but unfortunately I've had very little time with that, so I cannot give you a meaningful comparison between that and the Isvarna yet, but when I do get to that review, I will be sure to compare the Isvarna to it in there as well. Other high-end closebacks that I have heard include the ZMF Vertite closed and the ZMF Atrium closed. So I'm also going to comment on those in here as well. And then a long time ago, the Focal Stellia. That review, again, long time ago. I'll link to it in the description, but some of these I'm just going to have to go with some more vague comparisons from memory. Let's start with that Stellia comparison, because the Stellia, I think, is about $3,000 USD, and I'm hearing rumblings that Focal is going to be updating the Stellia soon. This video is likely to release publicly after Can Jam New York 2025, so by the time you watch this, you may have heard about a Stellia V2. I have no idea. I'm just spitballing on that. But anyway, to the original Stellia, though, the dynamic nature of the Isvarna and the Stellia are probably similar in terms of just their activity level, how hard they hit, the snappiness through the mid-range and all of that. I imagine they are fairly close to each other in resolution. If I had to guess, I would think that Stellia might just out-resolve this one a hair, maybe, but that's really kind of a shot in the dark going from memory, and also being like blown away by Stellia's resolution at the time and having not heard as much, because it's been 4 years ago. It's been a while since I've heard that the Stellia in there. The Stellia also had a weird mid-range tuning to it, and so vocals sounded even less accurate to my memory than the vocals sound on the Isvarna. And same thing with like piano, guitar, brass, woodwind, string, timbre, that kind of thing. The Stellia struggled with those a little bit, where this was still not great, but better than my recollection of Stellia. Again, but please take the grains of salt, okay, into account there. It's just been 4 years, I think, since I heard of Stellia. So, you know, who knows? Okay. Let me comment about a comparison to the closed ZMFs that are like in that $2,500, $2,600 range. Again, I've not had much time with the Caldera closed yet, so I can't comment there. Okay, but the Atrium closed, the Vertite closed. I prefer the Isvarna to the Vertite closed easily. I am just not, I might be a weird one, I'm just not a fan of the Vertite closed, okay? A much more uneven frequency response and tuning to that one than this is, much less resolving than this is. Probably has a lot of the dynamics and impact that this one does, but this one has that bass shelf that is fun that the Vertite closed did not, okay? I think the more interesting comparison is with the Atrium closed, because I did end up liking the Atrium closed a little bit, and it's interesting to me how the Atrium closed and this one have some similarities in terms of their tuning, their tonality, and their timbre are not necessarily natural and they're not necessarily accurate, but the overall presentations of the two headphones is so much fun, right? Like, I really enjoyed listening to the Atrium closed. It wasn't super accurate, okay, but it was engaging and it was fun and it drew me in. And the Isvarna does a lot of that too. The Isvarna beats the Atrium closed in terms of bass presence and just that overall bass presentation. If you're a bass head and you like what cranked up subwoofers can do in a 2-channel system, you kind of get that on your head, okay, here with the Isvarna. But if the bass on the Isvarna is too much for you, but you still like a fun, dynamic, lively sound, then look at the Atrium closed. The Atrium closed, I think, might have had just a little bit more sibilance issues than the Isvarna has, in my memory, but my memory also says that while the Atrium close's mid-range tuning wasn't perfect, it might be a little bit smoother than the Isvarna in there. The Isvarna throws a bigger stage though, like that I'm fairly confident in saying in there. But it's really going to come down to, do you like the bass of the Isvarna, or do you like a little bit less bass there from the Atrium close? And do you like the fact that the Atrium close is a high impedance dynamic driver, 300 ohm dynamic, and like the different amp combinations that opens up that may not be available to the Isvarna? I think those are going to be the biggest considerations there, given how close the two of them are in price, and given the fact that neither of them have a super accurate tuning, but they both have very, very fun and engaging presentations. All right, Radiance, again, $1,300, so really less than half the price of this. The Radiance has a more natural tuning to it. The mid-range and treble tone and timbre on the Radiance is more realistic, more natural, more organic sounding, all of that. The Radiance also has a bass shelf to it in the low end. It's not quite as present in the bass as the Isvarna is, though. The Isvarna just takes it to another level, okay, over that. But in terms of the tech, so while the tuning through the mids and the treble on the Radiance are definitely more accurate, more natural, and less fatiguing on more signal chains, the Isvarna beats the Radiance in everything else, as it should for its price. Resolution, texturing, soundstage size, the accuracy of the imaging and the separation and the spatial stuff in all of that. It is the superior headphone in all of those ways. But to me, I have fun listening to both of them. Like, they are both, again, fun presentations. The Radiance is easier to drive though, so it's and it's not as big or as bulky. Even though focals are can spreaders, you can never really get them to collapse on each other there. Okay, this one still travels better, okay, and wears better on the go and around than the Isvarna does. E3. The tuning on the E3 is far superior to the Isvarna. If you are a tuning hawk, the accuracy of the tuning and the tone on the E3, in terms of like the tonal balance in particular, the relationship between fundamental frequencies and their harmonics is much better on the E3 than it is on the Isvarna here. But the Isvarna still has that bass shelf, okay? But the Isvarna is the more fun, active, engaging, hard-hitting, punchy, bassy kind of headphone. This is like a musical analysis tool. The E3 is more like a musical analysis tool. That doesn't mean that it isn't enjoyable. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. But it is more of like a critical listening, okay, kind of headphone, where the Isvarna is just like party time, put this on your head, okay, have a good time in there. All right, at least that's what it is like to my ears. All right. When I would switch between these two, the E3 and the Isvarna, some interesting things happened. One of the things that would always jump out to me right away is just that the mid-range and the treble tonality of the Isvarna was not nearly as balanced or as accurate as it was on the E3. Okay, so that's just a thing. And then I also would notice that lots of bass, not nearly as much bass. I mean, we still have good bass presence and extension on the E3, but just not as much as you get on the Isvarna here. Okay, but then like I worked really hard to like listen for differences in like staging accuracy. Isvarna is a bigger sound stager yet than the E3, and the E3 is already on the big side. But things like imaging separation and all of that, and then like resolution, detail retrieval, texturing. The Isvarna does just edge out the E3 on some of the very subtle details, on some of the texturing elements. Okay, just a little bit more convincing spatial separation between adjacent sounds, that neither sounds discretized nor overly blended together. The Isvarna draws those out just a little bit more than the E3. So there are some comparisons there. What does this tell us about the Isvarna? Let's kind of roll all of this in together. The Isvarna is not a musical analysis tool, in my opinion. It doesn't have the accuracy of tone in it, and that bass shelf is a bit crazy. The Isvarna is a party on your head kind of headphone. It's going to bump, okay? It's going to hit, it's going to slam, it's going to be fun, okay? It is, you just want to just get lost in the music and have a good time. It doesn't have perfect tonal balance. It doesn't have perfect timbre. It's not horrible in those areas, but if you are a timbre hawk, then it may not be right for you. Like if you can't enjoy music unless it has absolutely perfect timbre, then you probably don't want to go Isvarna on there. Now, is the Isvarna worth its price at $2,900? When the E3 is an excellent all-around closed back, and so is the Radiance and all of that, and those are $1,300 for the Radiance and $2,000 for the E3. Harder question to answer. The Isvarna is just so much fun, right? I keep using that word over and over again because I had a lot of fun when I listened to it. I really enjoyed music in it. It does have some shortcomings, but to my ears, it makes up for its shortcomings in just the pure fun and enjoyment factor. Okay. Its technical advantages in terms of like resolution and spatial accuracy and all of that over the E3, for example, is very difficult to pull out. It took a lot of work to get it to get that to come forward, but it is there. So is it worth $900 over the E3? I don't have a confident answer that it is, and I don't have a confident answer that it isn't. It's going to be very much up to you. If I were to buy one, I could have only one, and it was just after musical enjoyment, I might lean towards Isvarna. But my listening needs are different than most listening needs anymore, and the E3 is the more overall useful headphone for me as a tool to analyze gear and music and all of that. But that makes it sound like it's not enjoyable, which, I mean, I also very much enjoy the E3 and can enjoy music a lot through it as well. One of the reasons I bought it. Okay, so that isn't, I recognize that isn't a clean slam dunk answer one way or the other, but I will just throw my thoughts out there and leave it to you, the viewer and potential buyer, to decide on that one. But the only HiFiMan closeback of recent generations I have not yet heard is the R10P planar. That's a $5,500 unit, and no one really talks about it, so I'm thinking it's probably not that great. Okay, but of the closebacks that I have heard from HiFiMan, this is easily the one that I have liked the best. It is the one that has gotten the closest to it, to getting it right there. It does avoid the phasing issues, like I mentioned that at the top and then forgot to come back when I was talking about the sound. And the reason I didn't bring it up is because it's not an issue. They have solved the phasing issues in here that come from multiple drivers. I never noticed the bass sounding disconnected from the rest of the presentation or anything like that. It's a very organically blended sound in there with the multiple drivers to boot. Okay, but easily HiFiMan's best closeback, and so if they're going to start making really solid closebacks right now, then they have just taken the next step as a company. All right, so those are my thoughts on the HiFiMan Isvarna. Thanks for watching. Please remember to like, subscribe, comment, check out my PayPal, my Patreon. Generally do those things you do to support YouTube channels, and as always, enjoy the music.